Now we're going to talk about shading cylinders. I've already got the cylinders drawn. I've got one cylinder lying down and another cylinder standing up, and we're going to talk about how we go about shading those particular shapes. First, we're going to talk about the cast shadows that these pieces will create, because you can't just draw a shape, just shade it without having a cast shadow and make it look believable. Everything creates a cast shadow. So let's once again pick our light source area. I'm going to go ahead and put it over here, so as if it's out in front of the pieces like this and off to the right. And I'm just going to draw that little reminder over here on the right side of my page. Alright, so if my light source is here on the right, and we're going to create a cast shadow of this cylinder that's laying down, first thing we're going to do is start by drawing some lines that are adjacent here to this ellipse on the end. I'm going to start with the one closest to me, and I'm going to draw a line that is parallel to the horizon line and the top and bottom of my page. Draw a line there, and then I'm going to come back and do it against this ellipse on the back. And once again, notice I've drawn through so we can see where that ellipse starts and stops on the back. And that's going to help me create an accurate cast shadow. It's absolutely vital that we draw this as a glass cylinder in order to get an accurate cast shadow. Same thing over here with the one standing up. You can't just draw the sides that you see. Alright, so we've got these lines, and these are going to help us create ellipses that would represent each of these sides, just like we did for our sphere in a different video. Alright, so I've got these two lines, and now I'm going to draw the direction of the light off of these ellipses. So if I'm over here to the right, I'm going to go adjacent to my back ellipse and draw in a line that matches up and intersects with that line that was parallel to the horizon line. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. And that's important because this is a circular object, and so it sticks out around here. So we're going to see a little of a cast shadow along this side as well. So notice here I've got this direction of light line and this, and they should be parallel to each other, but they intersect that horizontal line down on the ground. I'm coming back over here to the ellipse that's closest to us and do the exact same thing. I'm going to go adjacent to the ellipse and make another line that represents the direction of the light, and then I have to actually extend my ground line out a little bit, and this line here should be parallel to these other ones that I drew. We don't want this one to be at a different angle. And then I come over here and I draw the same thing, and it should also be parallel. So all of these lines would be parallel to each other. They're going at the same angle. Alright, so now I've got my direction of light mapped out, and I've got my ground line. And so from these points I can create an ellipse that would be the cast shadow of the straight cut off circular ends of our cylinder. So that horizontal line that we drew, that becomes a sort of bisector for our ellipse, and then we also know that it's going to start and stop where the direction of light line hits that ground line. So there's my ellipse for this leading edge closest to me. And then I'm going to come back and do another ellipse that's, very similar in thickness to the one I already drew at the front. It's a little smaller because it's further away, but we know exactly where it's going to go because we've got these kind of guidelines that we've already set up for ourselves. Alright, now, just like we connected our ellipses together for the actual cylinder, we're going to do the same thing for the cast shadow. So I'm going to go adjacent to my ellipse on the ground, and I'm going to go back to where it meets up with the one at the back, and if I extended it on, it would go back to the vanishing point over here, vanishing point right. We're also going to do the same thing with this little overlap here on the front, because remember it's a round shape. So this too would go back to the vanishing point if I extended it on. So my actual shadow then sticks out just a little bit here on the front, and then it comes around like this, get closest to us. Okay, so there's the line of the cast shadow for this cylinder that's laying down. Let's talk about how we go and shade the cylinder. There's actually going to be 3 values, just like there were on the cube, only this time they're going to gradually sort of move around the piece. So we're going to have our value 1, which is our highlight, our value 2, which is sort of our middle ground, and then our value 3, which is our core value, our darkest value. Now, the interesting thing to remember about those values on a cylinder shape is that we don't want our highlight to be right on the top edge. Okay? Our light source, remember, is really kind of out here. So our light source is then going to be, or our highlight is actually going to be set in just a little bit from that edge. And I'm just going to map it out. And this too, this line here would also go back to the vanishing point if I extended it. And I'm going to just map out that area that would be a highlight, going from front to back, and the 2 would go back to the vanishing point. I'm going to erase out my corner of my box a little bit there so that you can see that highlight, those highlight lines. I don't want to make them really dark at this point, but I want you to be able to see that. Okay, so there's our highlight. And then the same holds true for the core value, or value 3, our darkest value. We don't want it right up against the bottom edge of our cylinder because it's going to be right next to our cast shadow. And our cast shadow value is going to be our darkest value. So if we have a very dark value here matched up to another really dark value, we're really going to lose the definition of our shape here, our form. So our value 3 is also going to move in from the very bottom. So I've got my line here, and these 2 would go back to the vanishing point. So my value 3 then is set inside. It's not right on the very edge. So I'm going to start shading that in now. So there is our darkest core value, and that's going to actually, get a little darker as we keep moving out. But then it's going to start getting lighter, and this becomes a value 2 right here that matches up to the very bottom of our cylinder. So a value 2 right there, and a value 2 right in here after our core. That goes around to our highlight, which is our value 1. And then after our highlight, we also go back to a value 2. Okay, so it goes from a value 2 to our value 1, back to a value 2, and that gradually gets darkest and becomes our core value. But it's not right against the very bottom. That's really important. It gets lighter again as it moves away from us. Okay, now, we can define this shape even more by then filling in our cast shadow. And our cast shadow is going to be a very dark value, especially when it's closest to the object. So notice when I go ahead and start filling in that cast shadow, how that really starts to define then the edge of our cylinder. I don't have to put some harsh outline around it. I can use my cast shadow to create the boundary for that cylinder. I'm going to go back in here and just add a little more core value. Just going to start making that look even rounder. And I'm going to actually get that just a little bit darker on that top edge. And notice how when we have those contrasting values with each other, a strong highlight with a strong core value, they really start to play off each other and make the shape more defined and makes it actually pop. So now I'm going to bring my cast shadow up around here to the front, and once again it's very dark closest to the object, and that helps define our shape really nicely. And then as it starts to move farther away, it actually, the cast shadow itself actually can lighten up just a little bit. If this is a really tall building, the cast shadow would be really light the further away it is from the object. But it gets darker the closer it is. Okay, now we've got a definite sense of light with our highlight, our value 1, and our value 2, and our value 3. But we also have this end right here. It is away from the light, so it's actually going to be shaded. It's going to be darker. Now, some little tricks to remember here. This would be like a value 3, but we also want to not make it just a uniform value 3, but kind of keep in mind what's going on some of these edges here. We've got this value 1, a highlight, and then a value 3 here. So let's just start in by putting in some value. Once again, notice I'm not as dark as my cast shadow, so that my form, I don't lose definition on my form. I'm actually going to lighten it up just a little bit right here where it meets up with the core value, so that we have a definite distinction between those sides. And then I'm going to come in and actually make it just a little bit darker right there where it meets up with the value 1. Notice I'm shading by using sort of a circular stroke so that you don't end up seeing a lot of the direction of the pencil strokes. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to darken this edge just a little bit and then let it slowly fade out right there. And that's sort of juxtaposed against the bottom here, because notice this is against the cast shadow. So really what this is, this darker area here, it helps us sort of define this edge against the value 1 here, but it's also a reflection of this cast shadow that's up against the edge of our cylinder here on the end. Okay. So I can define that edge by really building up a strong core value and then leaving this nice transition between the darker value here and the lighter value there. So there's a really nice shaded cylinder that's laying down. I can come back and define my edges, and if I even need to, I can erase out my lines of my box. I'm going to try to put a really strong outline right along the bottom, because where this touches the ground surface, it's going to be really nice and dark. But we don't want to get in the habit of creating a lot of hard outlines around things. We want to use value to help really define our forms. All right, so now let's talk a little bit about the one standing up. We're going to go ahead and create a cast shadow for this as well. We're going to go straight out, just like we did over here. We're going to go straight out, tangent to that ellipse that's on the bottom. I'm going to do it from the front and from the back. So we have two nice parallel lines that are also parallel to the horizon line. I'm going to go ahead and change pencils, get something a little bit crisper. Okay, so then we're also going to come in and do another one through the center. All right, now we've got the center line in which we're going to build an ellipse off of, and we're going to go from this edge here and draw the direction of our light. And when you have shapes that are, on the same page, you want these to be parallel to each other as well. We don't want this particular cast shadow to be at a different angle when it's with another one on the same page. So same angle right there. And now I've got some parameters in which to draw an ellipse. Now this ellipse is on the same line as the one here, so my thickness is going to be very similar. and that becomes the top edge of my cast shadow. It goes on back like that. So I can go ahead and shade that in so we can see it just a little bit better. And this is why we are drawing through. Helps us to really map out those cast shadows. Really nice and accurate. Once again, closest to an object, I'm going to be the darkest. And then this one is taller, so it's going to have the opportunity to fade out even more as it moves away. Okay, so then as we go ahead and put a little shading on our cylinder, we're going to apply the same principles. Once again, we're not going to put our core value right on the edge, because right here we would really lose definition. So that core value is going to step in just a little bit from the edge. Map that out like that, and then our highlight also on the other side is not going to be right on the very edge, but inset just a little bit, and so we'll have a value 2 on this leading edge. And a value 2 on this back edge, so that we can really see the definition of the piece, of the shape against the cast shadow. Okay, and as the core value starts to move around, we go back into a value 2. Until we meet up with our highlighter, our value 1. Now, you just have to step back from these every now and then and see, okay, where do I need to add a little more value to make this really look as though it were a round object? I'm going to build up my core even just a little bit more. And then also as it's going away from us there. And I've got my strong highlight on the other side. I'm also going to come in here at the very bottom and create that really solid line on the bottom, right where it meets the surface that it's sitting on. We're going to have the strongest shadow, so that makes that really nice and dark. Add a little more shadow. Now my very top, in this case, because my light is here, my top on this cylinder is actually going to be the lightest value, but I'm still going to remember how we did it over here. We made it just a little darker right there. I'm going to do that just a little bit right there to just create a little differentiation, and kind of at the very back, and let it get lighter right there by the core value. And there we have 2 cylinders nicely shaded with cast shadows.